A live look right here. The sun now setting as it is very dark here at the border between Israel and Gaza. And I did want to bring you the very latest as we take a live look right here as Israel has declared Gaza City as a combat zone, expanding its offensive and limiting the delivery of foods and supplies in the north of the Palestinian territory right there. An Israeli official said that the country will soon halt or slow humanitarian aid in parts of northern Gaza as it expands its military offensive against Hamas a day after the city was declared a combat zone. Israel also ending daytime pauses in fighting to allow aid delivery, describing Gaza City as a Hamas stronghold and saying that a tunnel network remains in use by the terrorist group. The United Nations and partners have said the pauses, airdrops, and other recent measures have fallen short of the 600 trucks of aid needed daily in Gaza. To speak more on all of this, I do want to bring in Director of Foreign Policy at JINSA, Jonathan Ruhe. And Jonathan, I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me here on Live Now from Fox.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's my pleasure.
So Israel has declared that Gaza City is a combat zone, stating that it is going to slow down and halt the delivery of humanitarian aid. One of the priorities, of course, is to relocate Palestinian civilians to a different area. No doubt a very complex and lengthy process. When we take a look at this, from the standpoint of the civilians, how is Israel facilitating this and where are the Palestinians moving to?
So it's a very good question and a tough one. As we've seen throughout this war, really since not long after October 7th, 2023, Israel has sort of pursued a general tactic of trying to evacuate as many civilians as possible from looming combat zones, as you mentioned now, Gaza City. They've tried to set up humanitarian corridors and humanitarian safe zones at various points throughout the Strip, generally more toward the center and south, which is less populated. And they've also tried to set up what have variously been called humanitarian islands or strong points, basically aid distribution sites where Israeli troops and perhaps those cooperating with them inside Gaza can try to distribute various food and other aid. Part of the problem is that Israel, they move the civilians out of a designated combat zone. IDF troops go in and clear the zone of Hamas, but then they sort of move on and rinse and repeat in other areas of the Strip, allowing Hamas to sort of recrudesce, regrow in the areas that have just been cleared. And also a lot of civilians try to move back into those areas after IDF combat troops have moved on. I think one thing that makes the current operation so significant is even though before this, Israel controls roughly 3/4 of the square mileage of Gaza, that's only accounts for about 1/4 of the population. A lot of the population still is in Gaza City or around the north, which is sort of the geographic or demographic center of gravity of the Strip. So it'll be even more complex in this operation.
We were talking about the civilians, but you also mentioned Hamas, and that's the other component of this, Israel working to eliminate Hamas. We have also been covering extensively the tunnel system that is underneath the ground, which is how Hamas is able to move from various locations. When we take a look at Israel expanding its offensive into Gaza City, working to eliminate Hamas, I have to wonder if Hamas is also not relocating.
Yeah, it's, frankly, I think your question gets to an underlying point, which is for all the great intelligence successes we've seen Israel have against Iran this summer, and then also against Hezbollah about a year ago, Israel has continually been surprised the deeper they go into Gaza by just the sheer extent of Hamas's infrastructure, particularly, as you mentioned, the subterranean dimension, which has wildly exceeded any of Israel's pre-war intelligence assessments. And so, what this does is, in addition to the fact that Hamas has basically built Gaza into a house-by-house building by building network of fortifications, it basically allows Hamas to re-infiltrate and basically move back into areas after the IDF troops have cleared them. So it enables Hamas to basically choose if they want to stand and fight when confronted with the IDF, or if they want to sort of shrink back, sort of let the IDF sort of throw an empty punch and then come back in after the IDF troops move on. Because ultimately for Hamas, they've known ever since this war started, it's a stand-up fight with Israel. That's one they're going to lose. But ultimately, if they can continue to have a presence, wave the flag, even as a lot of their leaders are eliminated from the top down, for them, that's the victory there is survival. And so that's one advantage that Hamas has had throughout this war, is their definition for victory is much more minimal and lower than Israel's.
Looking ahead, Israel is also, discussing this as it continues to expand its offensive. But what happens next after the elimination of Hamas? That conversation continues right there. When it comes to rebuilding Gaza City, where does that discussion stand, and who is at the table right now?
So, I think that's still an open-ended question, which is kind of surprising to hear, nearly 2 years into this war. Israeli operations have been defined, rather sort of, strictly with what's right in front of them, which is basically searching and destroying as much of Hamas's military and infrastructural capabilities as possible. And there's been a continual decision by Israel's political leaders to kick that can down the road, to avoid having to make the tough decisions about what the day after, as we call it, looks like. How do you care for roughly 2 million civilians at the same time that you try to build something that's better than what Hamas had, and basically prevents Hamas from eventually retaking the Strip if they survive. And so, I think currently this is actually leading to a bunch of loggerheads between the political and military echelons inside Israel, the military telling the political leaders, we're struggling as it is to field the manpower to keep this war going. We're not a society that's designed for long-term, large-scale mobilization, which is what they've been doing in the Gaza war. And so they're basically saying, we need more strategic clarity about where this war is going and how it will end, and how we're going to leverage our partners, not just the United States, but Israeli leaders still talk about this, ideally Arab partners as well. It's sort of a chicken and egg, but as long as Israel hasn't defined how they're going to defeat Hamas, how they're going to use their partners to build something that comes better after the war, we'll continue, I think, to just be in this sort of strategic dead end.
I also want to ask you about French President Emmanuel Macron, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and other world leaders continuing to state that come September, they will recognize a Palestinian state. And that, of course, has caused friction with Israel and also with the United States. Is there any concern that this could potentially embolden Israel's enemies, including Hamas?
Certainly, I think so. And that's the really thorny issue of all this, because we've seen in recent years a growing number of countries around the world, even some in Europe, start saying they're going to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state even before October 7th. But I think it's what is particularly alarming now, especially from Israel's perspective, is that its key partners, especially in Western Europe, but also Australia, that have long held off on pursuing such an option. So I think two things can be true at the same time. Israel, as we mentioned, Israel does not have a particularly coherent strategy for how to wind up the Gaza war one way or another. Hamas certainly refuses to agree to a ceasefire, which is a complicating factor, to be sure. But at the same time, I think it's misguided for these countries, big diplomatic international players like those in Western Europe, to basically say, to use a Palestinian statehood as leverage against Israel, precisely because of what you mentioned. It encourages Hamas to dig in, to continue to refuse even increasingly generous ceasefire offers, and ultimately to hold out for survival, because they know the longer they hold out, the more they can gain on the political and diplomatic level in ways that punish Israel. And so I think certainly, the U.S. position has always been Palestinian statehood is not going to be declared unilaterally. It's to be negotiated between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And so I think this is incredibly damaging for that reason as well, because it undermines what is still, a declared goal of the United States is to eventually have some political horizon that eventually leads to a two-state solution, even though it's probably very far in the future.
Jonathan, we appreciate you joining us here on Live Now from Fox to talk about this ongoing issue.